Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and today with me is my co host, Caleb, of course. Caleb, how are you this afternoon?
Yeah, doing good. Glad to be here.
Great. We're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, we don't have a guest today, but we did want to chat about our memories of youth group because as we've started to interview people, it's come, it's all kind of rosy. There's a lot of just fun, of course, as there should be, but there was also tough stuff too, right? And we wanted to just talk about kind of how those memories of being a kid in a youth group still affect us today, whether there's guilt, shame over some of that stuff, and how it plays a role in our mental health.
Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show. Yeah, this topic kind of came from me. So, little behind the curtains is I'm doing a lot of the editing for these. And as I was editing them, I was like, oh, this is so fun. We're having such a good time. And even in that moment, I had these moments of feeling a bit of guilt for this idea that, like, I was a jerk at times. I was a total at times. And here I am just pretending like none of that ever happened. And I don't think we're doing that. Like, I don't think we're just breezing over that. It's just that that's not what the focus of the show is. So it then made me think about, like, oh, do we at least need to come out here and acknowledge, like, we both understand? And I will speak for myself, especially on this topic. I understand I made some pretty big mistakes, not just in, like, the sin that we all deal with, but just even, there's times where I didn't treat people well. There's times where I was arrogant. And it was almost like this idea of, like, do we need to say this? And I know people know, but I don't know. It got me thinking about the whole topic of all of it. So,
We were not saints, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, and maybe we get to a point of talking to, youth group leaders, and they'll be like, no, you were not saints, As part of the therapy that is recording this podcast with you, it's good to, just acknowledge, like, yeah, we made a lot of mistakes, and like you said, there was things attitudes that we adopted that weren't, that were basically the same as all many other high school kids. Look, when you're a teenager, when you're in high school, you're going to do stuff that you're going to be embarrassed by. And we've heard it multiple times already, interviewing a few people. I'm glad there wasn't YouTube when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
My son just started a YouTube cooking channel, and he's doing it like 3 times a week. He's making stuff. So now he's making his own food. It's great. But, I totally would have done that at his age. I
Yeah.
absolutely would have if it was around. So I get that part of it. But then you also don't want the things that you regret showing up 10, 20 years later either.
Yeah, totally. My kids are enamored. In the last year, I don't have a big following on Twitter, but I've grown a bit of a following because I post about a lot of music stuff. And people comment and people engage, and, like, my kids, it's been funny to watch them be like, oh, you're famous, and I'm like, nope, 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 I'm not. But they see that as, like, oh, people are listening to you, and so I can see the attraction to my kids, even though none of them have social media, and I don't have any influence. It's just me posting about music and people talking. There's no influence here. And so, like,
Mhm.
yeah, I totally understand that idea that I am thankful there was not YouTube and Twitter around when we were kids. I think it would have been bad for me.
Well, I mean, I'm sure some parent somewhere has a videotape or two of whatever videos we decide to make. And you're pretty good about this. When those types of things pop up and they were silly and goofy and just kind of embarrassing and, that kind of teenage way, you're just like, whatever, we were so young. I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about it. But there are other things that we did that the decisions that we made that we still feel shame over. And why is that? Like we came up through a teaching of like grace and forgiveness, and yet here we are still holding on to things, wishing we could have done them differently.
I I I definitely am able to draw a line between embarrassing and like just embarrassing children stuff and the guilty like, oh, I really didn't treat that person well. Like I can divorce those two and be like,
Hmm.
embarrassing stuff, no big deal. I just don't, that stuff doesn't bug me because it just, I don't know why that stuff rolls off my back. The other stuff though doesn't, and it hasn't. Now I think I were talking about before this. Like I'm almost 45, so yes, I'm not hung up on the stuff, the mistakes I made as a 16-year-old. That is 30 years ago, right?
Yes,
25,
that's
whatever.
that's public education math at work right there.
Yeah,
Uh,
29 years ago. You should listen to my other show where I talk about album anniversaries, and I have to do the math on while I'm
on
recording. It's
years.
never good. But that's 30 years ago. I'm not hung up on those things. I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to let those mistakes ruin my life. But I also have had serious times where I struggled with feeling this guilt over whatever mistakes, and not even just big ones, but even just, I distinctly remember I was upset with John and I said something to him that I shouldn't have. I was arrogant. It was in Mexico. I still remember it. It is clear as a bell to me what I said to him and how I said it, and I
Hmm.
feel bad about it still. I was not even 16, I think. I was younger than 16. I still feel bad about it. And so that's just one of many. And so I think it's just kind of that acknowledgement of like, yeah, we're talking about, oh, we did this mission trip, we did this thing. I also did this thing that I'm not going to bring up on the podcast necessarily, but it's there. And I just kind of felt like this sense of like, oh, we should probably be honest about it. So yeah,
So for you listener out there, because I think we're probably still at one of our moms.
yeah, it's a good chance for me to apologize. Sorry, mom.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's what she's waiting for. She's been listening for like 10 minutes, and she's like, please, please, just say you're sorry to me one time.
Why is this episode 20? What is going on here? It was all a ploy.
But yeah, Les, do you think that we were just great kids all the time and following the rules and having a good time? Like, no, there's that part of your high school slash youth group experience that will always stay with you. And look, I mean, if we ever get the chance, maybe we'll talk to John and have him on. And I would bet a decent amount of money that if you said that, he'll be like, hey, it's no big deal. Like, I've forgiven you long ago, water under the bridge. But it's not even that so much is about how you feel about yourself in that situation, right?
Yeah.
'Cause I'm sure he's forgiven you, but that doesn't mean you forgive yourself.
For a while, I went to Bethlehem Baptist, and Piper gave a sermon on forgiveness. And I remember feeling like, oh, I don't have anybody that I need to forgive. I feel like I've done all that. And I then had this overwhelming feeling of I cannot forgive myself for the things I've done in the past. And I was like it once I thought about it, it seeped in and it messed me up for a couple weeks. Like I eventually had to like
Mm,
go try and talk to a pastor about it. Like I was really messed up about it because I was just like, I still feel bad about these things I did 10 years ago. I think I was in my or mid 20s at the time, and I still feel bad. I still feel bad, and like I could not let those things go that were just hanging on to me, and eventually I did. I was able to kind of process it and feel a bit of closure, but totally that sense of like, it's an interesting dynamic of how do you understand and process the mistakes of your youth but are not ruled by them, by the shame that may come with them. Like how
mhm,
do you do that as an adult, you know?
mhm.
I don't have any answers, by the way.
Oh, I was waiting for it. No,
Oh,
no, I mean, you hear people talk about Catholic guilt all the time. I don't think
mm,
it's a Catholic thing. I don't think it's an evangelical thing. I think it's a religious thing. When you set yourself up with a message from the beginning that you're, a sinner by no choice of your own, that's a theological statement, I suppose. But um, you understand, like the main message is you're a sinner, you need to be saved. You're going to filter all of your decisions through something that you, for all intents and purposes, have no control over.
mm,
And that leads to a ton of shame, right? And, was there ever a chance is there a chance for youth groups not to operate out of shame? I don't know, but
yeah.
that was a pretty heavy theme in the 90s. And I'd be remiss to not say, like, at least I think you do too, like, firmly believe in mental health and people need to take care of themselves. And especially post COVID, I think people realize, like, hey, I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think in the past it was much like, hey, you need to talk to a therapist. It's so much like, hey, like you did, go talk to a pastor, which can work great. I can,
Yeah.
that can, that helps many, many people. But especially these days, accessing mental health is very easy. And I know I've gone through my sets of therapy, more than, I've seen more than a few therapists in the last, 5, 10 years, and it's so helpful.
Hmm.
So if you're out there and you're feeling that even a heavier weight than we might be right now, and it's pushing depression or something like that, please go talk to somebody.
For sure. I think it's even you bring up the idea of like the theological statement. So like I still believe that I do like Jesus saves that still is true for me.
Of
And
course.
how do you do that? I've struggled with this. How do I teach my kids that I think there are sins and they're paid on the cross and there's forgiveness, but how do I not wear them down or overwhelm them with this idea that they're horrible from birth and there's something wrong with them that needs to be fixed? I struggle with that a lot and really struggle with going back and forth. This is not where we were going with this conversation.
Nope.
But when
Here,
you said it, I was
let's
like, oh my
go.
gosh.
Let's go.
So yeah, I've struggled with that a lot as like how do I manage this as a parent?
John Calvin would be very upset that you're not teaching total depravity. Um,
All of my Bethlehem friends are pretty upset with me at this point. So let's just throw John Calvin in there too.
they're gonna hate listen, so
Yes.
we'll take it. We just need the listens. We don't care if you hate it. But when I meant it's a theological statement, I didn't want to imply that, like, we have a choice between. Well, I mean, that was maybe that is a conversation for another time. But, like, do you have a choice as to whether or not you'd sin? The evangelical model is you absolutely do, but you kind of also don't.
Right.
And so, what are you supposed to do? And for me, it's an identity issue. And how are you teaching your kids, or how are we teaching our kids to understand their identity in God? And instead of maybe you don't start with you're a terrible person and you were terrible when you were a kid. Like,
Yeah.
even the I remember John talking about, like, how do I know sin's a thing? All I have to do is watch my 2-year-old and I know how selfish they are.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's like child development stuff, you know?
Right.
And, like, that was, like, very clearly stated multiple times. And I understand why, because then you want to juxtapose, there's the word again,
Jux.
juxtapose that with grace and how grace saves you. And it's an important part of the theology that we still more or less ascribe to, but, like, it's an identity message. So if your identity is you're a sinner right away, that's what's going to be your filter. Maybe the identity filter can be you are a child of God, you are created in his image. Look through that lens first. Sin or not, he loves you and he created you and he cares about you. And if you maybe start from that point, the other parts of the message don't feel so heavy or shameful.
Right. You may still have that shame, but maybe it is easier to work through. Maybe it's easier to articulate. I wonder how much different my life had been if from an earlier age I had felt really comfortable saying what I was ashamed of. Like,
Right.
I'm feeling shame about this, and I'm just gonna, get it out there and not worry about what's what other people are gonna be perceive it as.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that 2-year-old, Josh, come on the show. Josh,
Oh
we'd
my
love to have
gosh.
you on.
Oh
Josh
my
wants
gosh.
through. I agree. I can totally. When John did that, I could totally understand it. Yeah, you're right. Josh is sinful. He threw up all over me the first time I babysat him. So come on the show, Josh. Come
That's
on the
right.
show.
Talk about reminiscing.
Yeah. So we've gotten the kids, and then we'll get the kids of the youth pastors. This would be a
Yep.
real web that we
Yep.
can weave here.
You were 2 years old. Do you remember throwing up on Caleb's face? Nope. Sorry. Thanks for
I
talking.
do. Because there was I think there was a Bible study happening upstairs, and I finally just felt like I gotta go get help. I just got threw up
Oh,
on.
you were watching the kids. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like down in the basement watching the kids, and he threw up on me. I don't know how old he was, and I remember
Hmm.
just being like, yep, I'm just gonna interrupt the Bible study.
Well, I think it's a never-ending struggle of how you feel about your youth. Of man, I just I shouldn't have done that. Well, maybe the message is like you're gonna make mistakes. Do you have a safe place to, like you said, verbalize those things, go through how you're feeling at the time, and part of it was too, like we were in leadership and we were the face of some of this stuff for what youth group was doing, and you felt even worse when you made a bad choice.
Yeah, yeah. I think it just was one of those things that I wanted to acknowledge as I've been listening back to these. I really have because I'm going through them, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I wonder how clear it is that for me, for sure, I don't want to speak for you, but yeah, I look back on my youth group experience really fondly, but I also know I've I haven't handled everything in my life well, and it's maybe good to just acknowledge that we're not blind to that. So
Hmm.
so yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. A little bit of a shorter episode for us, which is nothing wrong with that. Next time, hope we'll have a guest on.
Yeah, or we'll just bring up real personal stories about you can just go through your list. I know you have one, Scott.
If I'm going to be your therapist, I expect some form of payment.
The call's breaking up. Gotta go.
Classic Caleb. Bring up money, and all of a sudden he leaves.
Exactly.
No, look, I'm happy to chat through those things if you need it. But we appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good. See ya. Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. The music that you hear at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can also email us at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, drop us a line or find us on Twitter. We would love to have you on. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.